Welcome back, everyone. And we're now going to do, I know I say this every time we do it, but it is 100% my favorite thing that we do on this podcast, which is answer actual questions that our listeners have sent in to us. We always, we tell you what we think you should know, but here's where you get to say, well, actually, this is what I actually want to know. Can you answer this question for me? And we love doing that. If you have a question that you'd like to get answered on air, feel free to submit it to us. We have so many different ways to get a hold of us. Go to our website, getintocollege.com. You can email us at gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com, or you can send us a message through any of our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok. We're everywhere. So just send us drop into our DMs, as the kids say, and we're happy to get your questions answered. And we actually had a live Q&A webinar that a couple of our colleagues did last night. And we did not get through all of the many, many questions that were submitted for that. So I've actually added those questions to our list. So if you were on our live Q&A and we didn't get to your question, tune in. We'll try to answer some today. If we don't get to them today, in future segments coming up. So just stay tuned to the podcast. We will try to get all of your questions answered. Now, joining me today to answer those questions are two of my colleagues, Alex Rendon and Zach Gries. Welcome, Alex and Zach.
Great.
Thank you
Thanks
so much.
for
And we're going to try not to talk over each other too much, but I think it's unavoidable. So Zach, so everyone knows, is a former financial aid officer at Loras College in Iowa. Alex is a former admissions officer at Mount St. Mary's and UC San Diego, obviously in California. I'm here in Boston. So between the three of us, I think we've got the geography of the US pretty well covered from east to west, and right there in the middle with you, Zach.
Yes.
So we've got the geography covered. Hopefully we have your questions well covered as well, but let's see about that. So let's dig in. And Alex, I think our first question is for you. It comes in through Suzanne. She submitted through our website. And she says, "Hi, I've been listening to your podcast for years, and it has really helped me understand the admissions process. Thank you for providing this valuable knowledge." Well, you're welcome, Suzanne. We're so glad you're listening. Here is Suzanne's question. From an admissions standpoint, does AP Computer Science count as a science credit? And Suzanne provides some context here. Our junior is choosing classes for her senior year. Our state requires only 3 science classes to graduate. She has already taken honors biology, AP chemistry, and honors organic chemistry. Wow. She is more interested in the AP Computer Science class than the other science classes offered at her school, which are, for the record, AP Environmental Science, AP Biology, AP Physics 1, and Honors Physics. We want to encourage her to follow her interests, but Suzanne says she fears that the lack of a 4th core science class may not look great to a college admissions officer who is examining her transcript. She says, "Not sure if you need this information to answer the question, but she has some selective schools on her college list. By the time she graduates, she will have taken 12 AP classes. She has a very strong GPA, all A's, scored a 35 on her ACT as a sophomore, works part-time, and has a decent activities list." Well, she sounds like she's killing it, Suzanne. I don't know what the actual answer to this question is, but I think your daughter's going to do great, whatever she does. But Alex, would you like to answer this question? Does the AP Computer Science count as a core science class? Is she going to have any issues if she takes this instead of maybe a more traditional science class?
So Shannon, definitely agree with you. It sounds like her daughter is absolutely killing it and doing so well in high school. So she's on a great pathway no matter what, with a lot of college options in her future. And I love that I can really tell that, Suzanne, you are that regular listener, because even in your question, you're alluding to what we at College Coach talk about a lot, which is your core coursework. So for those of you who may not be weekly listeners like Suzanne, the core is actually going to be 4 years of your 5 core subjects. So that's something that if you're aiming for a selective college or university, we encourage students to pursue. So what are those 5 subjects? That's going to be first your English, so 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 4 years of a history or social science, 4 years of a science, and then 4 years of a world language. So just kind of having that breadth of courses can be really important to these more selective colleges. So to your question, Suzanne, as far as does this AP computer science course count as a science class? This is where it gets a little bit tricky because, like everything in college admissions, it seems it depends. So there may be some colleges out there that say, yes, absolutely, this is going to check that box for a science course for us. Others, I think the majority may see it a little bit more as kind of the elective side of things. I can even give you an example of where I'm located in California. Our state colleges, if we're talking about AP Computer Science A, they say, oh yeah, math class. If we're talking about AP Computer Science Principles, they're going to say, okay, science class. That being said, I do think some of these more selective colleges do like to see, say, more kind of the traditional science courses. So biology, chemistry, physics, filling that slot. So that's actually something I might encourage your daughter to take a look at. It sounds like she's got the biology covered, she's got chemistry, organic chemistry, but an area that she might consider adding is that physics class to really round out her science education there. This is something, and it's about a 50-50 split. So I will say many of my colleagues who have worked at selective universities, they said if a student didn't have physics, then they might be in the no pile. Other colleagues at different selective universities didn't make a difference. So it really depends. So to answer your question, it does depend. And I would recommend that your daughter maybe reach out to a couple different colleges she's looking at and ask, how do you view this course? Do you have a preference for students maybe having that physics class? And then also, of course, chatting with her high school counselor, who's going to be a really great resource for her. So my preference, again, I'd say probably, add maybe that physics course. Maybe if we can add this computer science class as more of an elective option, that could be a pathway to take it as well. But, one factor, one class is probably not going to make or break any college admissions ever. So I think that's also really important to take into account here is, as you mentioned in your question, your daughter's doing really well, all A's, 12 APs, great extracurriculars, awesome ACT. So will one class make or break a college admission decision? I'd say likely not. So to some extent, pursuing your interest could be the right choice too.
Makes perfect sense. And we got our first it depends in on our very first question. That is why we are all still gainfully employed, because these questions are complicated and there isn't an easy kind of right or wrong answer. So the next question is for you, Zach.
Awesome.
And this came in from Sarah through our YouTube channel, which is great. And she says, I heard. So immediately I have to stop. Anytime a question begins with I heard, my antennas go up, because often the information you heard is not correct. Let's see if that's the case in this particular case, Zach. I heard that it is worthless to complete the FAFSA if your combined family income is above $101,000, and that it can, in fact, harm your ability to get merit or talent aid. Is this true, Zach?
Good question. Good question. My antenna also go up, like yours do, Shannon, when we hear things, but also when we have such rigid statements about a dollar value in the financial aid world. So that would be my other cue that there might be more going on or more worth thinking about as a family. If you're listening and you're thinking, what is the right dollar value? Similar to Alex's answer, in many cases, it depends. But what I can say to provide some more detail in response to this particular question is that the FAFSA is a federal application. And so where this myth may have come from is that somebody may have thought, I will not get federal dollars when I submit the federal application, because maybe the Pell Grant, which is the most common federal program, the cutoff is a little lower, which is, it could be true. I don't think I would view it rigidly. Where I worry in a case where a family may understand the FAFSA in this way is that we're missing out on the fact that many schools use the FAFSA data to also award state need-based dollars and institutional need-based dollars. So I can share an example. In my state in the Midwest, we would have many families that would not get the federal Pell Grant, but they would get, for instance, the Iowa tuition grant, which is worth almost $7,000 two to 3 years ago when I was last in financial aid as a financial aid director. That's a lot of money that a family would then have missed out on if they hadn't submitted the FAFSA and they didn't get the Iowa tuition grant. Similarly, our college was quite generous with need-based aid, and families making above $100,000 certainly got need-based aid from the college. And our cost was in the range of between $40,000 and $50,000. So I think as the costs continue to go up, that dollar figure may go up as well. So I think there's a lot more to look at when you're making that decision, rather than just what is my income in isolation and is it over a certain value.
Absolutely. And it having a detrimental effect on merit aid, Zach, I would say that not the case at all, correct?
Yeah, I've not seen that at all. And if anything, I can also share from my experience, many of the colleges in our conference would give small scholarships simply by submitting FAFSAs by a certain date. It helps the colleges plan, and it helps them make the decisions they had to make in terms of where they were going to offer those types of assistance. I don't know that that's prevalent across the country, but at least in the conference that I worked at, families that would submit a FAFSA, even if they didn't get the need-based aid, could still get some merit, in addition to never losing out on the opportunity for the standard structured merit.
Absolutely. And I think if you look at the statistics on merit scholarships, for better or worse, they go disproportionately to students with higher incomes. So you are not costing yourself merit scholarship money by completing a FAFSA. That the review for merit scholarships is typically completely independent of the FAFSA, with the exception, as you mentioned, Zach, of some colleges will throw you this sort of FAFSA filing scholarship just as an incentive to complete the form, as the colleges want that for, as you said, planning purposes. It helps them to distribute their institutional funding, because if they can fund somebody with federal aid, if a student's eligible for federal aid, which they need the FAFSA for, and they can save themselves some money by distributing some federal aid to them as well, they want to do that. So they want FAFSAs. So yeah, beware of the I heard, because it might set you on the wrong path. This next question that came in through our Facebook page, I think both of you might have a take on this. And this is a student in sort of a tough situation. So what she explains is she got into NYU to study political science and international relations on a pre-law track with lots of exclamation points. She's very excited about this. Unfortunately, however, NYU did not give me enough aid. So after law school, which she's planning on, I will be about $500,000 in debt. With that being said, I wanted to know if you, Alex and Zach, think that this is worth it. She goes on to explain that she has some very compelling reasons. I won't get into the details about why it is important for her to leave the state that she currently lives in, which is not New York. Sort of a bad situation in her current state. She wants to leave. She wants to move to New York City and get a chance at sort of a clean slate. Her only other two options, besides the very expensive NYU, would be to attend the online version of her local state university, or go to Pace University, which is also in New York City, and was a safety school for her, where she received a huge scholarship where she will be left with much less debt in the long run. So, Alex and Zach, I don't know which one of you wants to take this on first, but do you have any advice as to what she should do?
Alex, you want to kick off?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I love this question, and I think it really comes down to your values, and the decision that I might make is probably different than, maybe the decision that Shannon or Zach or, any individual would make. So, what would Alex do? I'd, take the money and run at pace, because that's, what is valuable and important to me. But I think it's really important for, students as they're making this college decision to think about what are the things that are most important to you. So thinking about, where are you going to be most happy? Where are you going to take advantage of all of the academic and extracurricular opportunities to do well? Because ultimately, when it comes to law school, things they're going to be looking at is, your performance in your bachelor's degree, so at the college level. So we want to find that place where you feel like you're going to be most successful. So that may be different for every student out there. Along with that, I did just want to point out, for the online option, I think for a lot of students, this can be a great pathway to pursue an education. However, it's not for everyone. I do think if your ultimate goal is law school, sometimes that online format makes it a little bit harder to make those one-on-one personal connections with your professors, who ultimately, may be writing you that recommendation for law school, or maybe you're getting involved in a research project with them. It also may be a little bit harder to get involved in, meaningful extracurriculars in that online format. So it's not impossible, but it is something that you do want to think about: is how do you best learn? Is the online environment something that excites you? And do you feel like you can do all of those kind of extras of making connections with faculty and getting involved in outside activities that are really going to bolster you in that law school application? So that's my 2 cents. Zach, I'd love to hear your perspective here.
Yes, I would echo your first comment. I think that there's so much value in accepting that any individual is going to have multiple values in this decision-making process, and it's up to each individual to weigh those values in terms of what they deem important. With that said, what I had done, seeing this question ahead of time, I did a little bit of math, and I thought, what does a $500,000 student loan look like? And in that case, our typical rule of thumb would be that you might anticipate spending 1% of that on repayment per month. So we figure $5,000 toward the service of the student loans. I was thinking, in New York City, if the student chose to live there afterwards, maybe assuming $2,500 of rent expense. And with those two figures in mind, that puts us at a $90,000 expense. I don't know what somebody graduating from law school would make living in New York City. That's a big question mark that I don't have an answer to. But I suppose my pragmatic suggestion to the student is, take those two figures I just gave you, look at some ranges for starting salaries, have somebody you trust think about how much you might pay in taxes and other withholdings from your income, and be sure you can answer the question, is this budget going to work? I think that's a very pragmatic way to tackle the question. My suspicion is that unless you're going to be making over $200,000 to $250,000, it's going to be really, really tough, if not impossible. And so if I play that forward, I would imagine this student would absolutely want to avoid having to move back home if they're trying to leave in the first place. They wouldn't want to move back home once their education is complete, just because the debt load is so high. So I think there's value in choosing a decision that's going to allow you the freedom to be independent when you're done. And I worry that the decision to take on this debt burden might not yield for that. The other thing I can suggest is that when I was a financial aid director, I had commissioned our institutional research office to do a study for us on what amount of educational loans in any given year would be detrimental to the student graduating. And depending on how much the student might need at NYU, I suspect they're going to be substantially above it. Now, there's a lot more elements into this particular study, but I would say that I think the debt load, it creates a unconscious stress, whether or not the student feels it on a day-to-day basis, because that's just a big burden. And so do you want to be going through NYU with the burden of this increasing price tag and debt load? And are you going to be able to compartmentalize that in a way that helps you make sure you do get good letters of recommendation and you build good relationships with professors and you do well in your classes? I don't know. I think that's another personal decision, but I would at least plant that seed that this student may want to reflect on that. And students in similar situations or listeners in similar situations may also want to be thinking about some of these things as well.
Completely. I love how both of you put an emphasis on what are your next steps. I think it's very easy for a high school student, parent of a high school student, to focus on where are they going to go to college? What are they going to do for the next 4 years? And I think it's really hard. Parents have, I think, some more perspective on this, though it's hard when it's your own kid. But as a high school student, that's what you've been potentially, dreaming of for the past number of years. But your life goes on. Your 4 years of college, in the grand scheme of things, a blip on the radar, and thinking about what are those next steps and where are you going to be able to engage and participate so that you can get those good recommendations and present yourself for a law school. Are you going to be able to live the lifestyle you want to live with a $5,000 a month loan payment? So I think expanding your horizons beyond this limited time decision for the next 4 years and think about what it's going to do beyond that, I think, is really good advice to everyone. And good luck to our listener who sent us this question. And I like
Yes.
Alex's advice of take the money and run.
I
We'll
did
see
too.
if after your analysis you feel the same way.
Yes.
And the next question, I think, back to you, Alex, sent in on our Instagram page. Do you have any suggestions for helping my high school junior become excited about the college search and research process? She is a very brave gal who has traveled internationally during summer breaks and does well in all of her classes. However, she has been very reluctant to decide on what she wants to do in the future or which university she wants to attend. In middle school and the first year of high school, she always talked about wanting to go to school abroad or on the opposite coast from where we live now. But this year, maybe things are getting a little more real. She seems very scared of the process. Are there any tips you can share? We've been trying to encourage her without pushing, but junior year is prime time to be figuring these questions out. What do you think, Alex?
Oh gosh, I just want to say I have so much empathy for this student. And this is something we see a lot with our high school juniors is they're starting to maybe feel a little bit more of that pressure and anxiety with the college search. Their teachers, their counselors, their peers, family, friends, everyone's asking, where are you going to apply to college? And that can feel really, really heavy for a lot of students. So I just want to acknowledge that it's okay that she's having these feelings and feeling maybe a little bit nervous about this process and a little less confident. Um, what I always really like to do with students is kind of start with some basics. So one thing I would recommend is let's start to figure out what do you want in that college? And also know it's okay if that changes every day from now to next year is we're just going to have a chance to do a little bit of exploring and try some things out. So how I like to approach this, I like to say, let's go shopping for colleges because we know there are over 1,000 colleges and universities out there. You're going to have wonderful college options for every single student. There is a pathway for you. So for now, let's try and figure out some of our likes and dislikes. So I'd recommend in, starting to shop around for colleges, let's take a look at some of your local area schools. So maybe checking out that, big flagship public institution. Then maybe let's compare that with a smaller liberal arts or medium-sized private option and start to see, what feels good. These may not ultimately be campuses that we apply to. Maybe your daughter decides that, yeah, she wants to be on the other coast or the middle of the country or in the South. But we can start to see the different types of colleges out there. I also, as you're starting your college tours, always recommend don't see the dream school first. Don't go to Harvard as your first college tour because everything might fall a little bit flat after that for a lot of students. So let's check out some local options, put no pressure on it, and say this is just our starter tour. We're going to go and see what's a college tour like and use that as a starting point versus seeing, that dream school that nothing's going to live up to afterwards. So that's my first bit of advice is let's just start to play around and see a couple colleges and see, our likes and dislikes. Also, I recommend, thinking about asking questions around the dinner table or in the car to sports practice, starting to have these conversations of, what do you picture yourself doing in college? Do you have a preference for being maybe a little bit closer to home? How would you feel if you can't make it back for mom or dad's birthday one year because you have classes or finals? How do those things feel? And starting to ask those big picture questions, but without pressure, because this is a conversation we can continue, and there's still plenty of time to find that right fit college.
Totally. I love that. Taking the pressure off a little bit. And my favorite thing you said, Alex, was that it's like shopping. Shop around. Everyone loves shopping, right? This should not be a stressful thing. This should be a fun thing. And I think, the narrative and the media, and it can feel this way, and lots of high schools these days, that there's just so much pressure on students. And what do I need to do to impress these different colleges, get into this stream school? Let the colleges impress you. Go shopping. Find out what you like. This should be a fun experience. And anything we can do, I think, to take the stress levels down a bit, it is a great thing to do for kids these days. The next, and I can't believe I just said kids these days. I do sound like a dinosaur. But Zach, the next question is for
Yes.
you. I
Awesome.
recently learned about Raise.me as a potential micro scholarship source. Is this a viable funding resource and advantageous to complete through our high school years, or would it constrain the potential funding a university may provide? I mean, maybe talk a little bit about what Raise.me is, what micro
Yes.
scholarships are. This might be a new term for some people.
Yes. So Raise.me is a platform that, as it partners with institutions, the institutions agree typically to offer the minimum amount of money that the student accumulates through this Raise.me platform by doing extracurriculars or taking certain classes. What I find to be, so with that premise in mind, I suppose it could be valuable. I don't think it will ever harm you from getting money from the institution. It's not ever going to be a detriment necessarily. What I think is worth understanding as you are trying to prioritize your time, your classes, what you're doing after class, is that because many colleges agree to providing the minimum through Raise.me, if they were already going to provide more than the minimum, it doesn't have a what I would call stackable effect. So for instance, the college I worked at, if we were going to give a student $20,000, but that student earned $5,000 through Raise.me, I don't think we necessarily have this in the background. I'm just using this as an example. The $5,000 would be encompassed in this $20,000 award they were going to get anyways. So in that case, the student may look at it and say, well, why did I spend my time and my energy in retrospect doing these things I wouldn't naturally have done? These are classes I wouldn't have taken. That's where I just encourage the student to not make this the sole focus. Alex, when she answered Suzanne's question earlier, I think gave a lot of good context for class selection and what you want to be thinking about. And I think some of those more holistic thought processes are probably more valuable than saying, every decision I will make should be centered around raised on me. So I would just add that color to this student's choices. Not that it's a bad thing. I think doing what you can to make sure you'll have some opportunities is good, but that would be worth considering as you're prioritizing your time.
Completely. And I think that Raised on Me, it sort of incentivizes good things that are going to help you through this process anyway. Are you actually going to see significantly more scholarship money from it? I think sounds like you agree. Usually not, right, Zach?
Yeah. And ironically enough, I'm thinking, Alex, of the answer you just gave. To some degree, gamifying some of this in a way may help motivate certain students and make it fun for them. So you're spot on, Shannon. I think there's value in looking at it from parent perspective in different ways, but the functional dollar value is I'm not so certain on.
Totally. The next question, I think again, you might both have somewhat of something to add here, but the question is, I was accepted off the wait list at my number 1 school. Super excited. My number 2 school, however, has a lower cost of attendance. And in addition, my number 2 school offered me a $4,000 per year merit scholarship. So number 2 school, less expensive to begin with, plus offered you a scholarship. Can I submit a letter asking to be considered for a merit scholarship at that number 1 school who has now accepted me off the wait list? Is there any downside to making this request? Anybody have a perspective on this?
I can start. So there's not necessarily a downside from the admissions perspective. You've been admitted. Congratulations. Yay. So it is not going to hinder that admission. No one's going to take it back. I will say for some colleges, we know that there's going to be deadlines to accept that offer of admission. So there may be a little bit of a time crunch that's involved here. And again, I do want you to be thinking about your values. You know, what is the most important thing to you out of your college experience? Because now we've got 2 wonderful options to choose from. And, you know, maybe that second option is more appealing, or maybe it's the first. So I think having that kind of internal dialogue, the pro-con list is going to be really important. Zach, I'd love to hear your perspective. Is it going to pay off?
Yes, I think fair game when it comes to negotiations. If the school has moved you off a wait list and price is an objection, my vote is that you go for it. You could share your competitive decision-making process, have your parents help you if they're able to, and send something off. I would echo your concern that you may also want to, even though you're negotiating, you're trying to optimize, you may want to make a decision or a commitment to decide one way or another before the deadline, because it's not to say that a college may respond to you by that deadline, depending on what it is. And you may have to make a choice without all of the information that you would like ideally. So just be prepared for both outcomes. But I think in terms of should I negotiate, can I certainly give it a shot?
Totally. And we are almost out of time. I wonder if I can get like a 30-second answer on this. I have a May 15th deposit deadline that's coming up at what is currently my first choice college. The problem is I'm still waiting to hear about financial aid from 2 other schools that I applied to and that have deposit deadlines in June. If they come back with better offers, that might change my first choice, but I don't want to lose that opportunity at your current first choice by missing their deposit deadline. What do I do? Anybody have a quick words of wisdom for one action item this student can take right now?
Mine would be ask for additional time if you feel you really need it. I think this is a weird year.
Totally agree with that, Alex. I think this is a weird year with the FAFSA, and colleges are seeming to me to be particularly amenable to be extending that deposit deadline. Do you get the same impression?
Yes, I think there's a lot of flexibility. It's a bonkers year, and I think we all recognize that. The colleges recognize that. So it does not hurt to ask. And again, worst they can say is no.
Absolutely. Love that advice. And that's all the time that we have today. So thanks so much for all of your help, Alex and Zach. If we didn't get to your question today, please keep on tuning in. We will be working through our list and trying to get all of your questions answered. Thank you to all the listeners for joining. If you did enjoy this episode, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We do greatly appreciate your feedback. And join us next week, where we are going to be talking about questions you should not ask an admissions officer. Ooh, this is intriguing. Maybe you should ask us instead, because we'll answer anything, but what you should not ask an admissions officer. And then we'll also provide tips to the seniors and the senior parents out there about preparing for the actual transition to college that you're going to be going through this summer. So please do tune in next week. And remember, we are here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific.